You guys like my socks? Where's Elizabeth? I saw her. There she is. Elizabeth brought me these socks today. I changed them yesterday because I was in Utah, I think, anyway, so I had to fly to North Carolina, and I wasn't able to pack my normal storytelling bag because I had packed for like a quick overnight trip, and then I had to sort of emergency fly to North Carolina to be with my mother. And so I didn't have all my stuff. I didn't have my cool bracelets. I didn't have my socks. I just had like overnight stuff. So Elizabeth took me to TJ Maxx yesterday so I could buy these new clothes because I didn't have enough clothes. And then I did buy socks, but these are much cooler than the ones I bought. So I switched them. Thank you. Just one more lovely little gesture from this fantastic festival. Thank you for all those wonderful stories. I really appreciated them. I want to tell you a story today that you probably think you already know. Once upon a time, there was a baby born with a full beard. So let's take a moment of silence to honor the mother of Paul Bunyan, because that had to sting. And by the time Paul Bunyan was 6 months old, he could no longer fit in his mother's lap, but she could fit in his. And so he would rock her at night, and she would sing out to him with the rhythm of the rocking chair, "Paul, my boy, you were born to be big." And he was. I was also born big. I didn't have a full beard, but I did weigh in at 11 pounds, 9 ounces. Let's have a moment of silence for my mother, because that also must have stung. But I entered the world just big. I had this big laugh, and I had these big dreams, and I had really big feet, and I had a big voice, and I also had really big glasses. When I was about 12 years old, it was time to get new glasses, and I went in and I picked out these bright green, huge frames. And it was before the big green, huge frames were cool. And I have a vague memory of my mother and the optometrist gently trying to redirect me to some lovely, lovely dainty pink lenses, frames, or some tortoise shells perhaps. But I wanted the green ones. It was big. So the day came and the glasses arrived. I got to leave school to go pick them up, and then I got to come back to school during recess. And so everyone was out in the fields playing, and I thought, this is my moment. I'm going to walk onto the field, and their awe and amazement will just hit me in the face. But what really hit me in the face was a football. They were tossing it around, and an errant football smacked me right there and snapped my brand new glasses in two. I know, such sympathy for a pair of glasses. And a wiser 12-year-old might have considered that a tap on the shoulder from God saying, make a better choice. But I ignored that voice. My mother had gotten the warranty, and so we went back and ordered the exact same pair of glasses. I went through 3 of those frames. God finally gave up and said, you're just going to keep wearing those. Because I was born to live big. Well, Paul outgrew his home. Really, he outgrew his neighborhood. And his father convinced his mother that it was time. Paul couldn't stay there anymore. He was too hard on the furniture. He was too hard on the pavement. And he found a cave on the outskirts of town. And Paul and his mother and father went and moved him in. And his mother went and visited him every day. And she taught him how to read. She taught him how to write. And there on the mouth of the cave, they scratched in the words, "Paul, my boy, you were born to live big." Now, if my big laugh wasn't enough, I also had this fascination with big humpback whales. I thought they were so cool, and I was obsessed with becoming a marine biologist. And if that didn't make me quite cool enough, I also wrote poetry. I was a big hit in middle school, almost as cool as Joel. And one day I was in Mrs. Darnell's gifted and talented classroom, because I was a nerd. And she announced that a poet was coming. A real life poet was coming to our classroom. And I thought, this is my moment. Oh, Paul outgrew the cave. And so he headed west. He heard everything was bigger and wider out west. And this is when he discovered he was quite good at cutting down trees. There was no road big enough for Paul Bunyan, so as he walked along, he just had to kind of clear his own path. And he tied all the logs together and just dragged them through the woods. And he got to a lumberjack camp where he discovered people were paid to cut down trees. And he thought to himself, this is my moment. And he found the foreman and he asked if he was hiring. And the foreman looked at this huge pile of logs and he said, "Where's your crew? Who cut this?" And Paul puffed out his already pretty puffed out chest and he said, "It was me. I did all this." And he expected to be hired on the spot, but this littler man popped out from behind the foreman. And he spit on the ground and it landed right next to Paul's boot. And he looked up at him and he said, "Prove it, because I think you're full of soup." And so Paul went to work. He picked up an axe in each hand. He got on this side of the road in this grove of trees, and the whole crew got on this side. And after about an hour, Paul switched to one axe and started slowing down because he was getting too far ahead. But at the end of the day, Paul had cut and split twice as much wood as the whole crew combined. And so he had a job. And he thought everyone would be happy to have him on the crew. But then that little man popped out from behind the foreman. And he spit again, but this time it landed on Paul's boot. And he said, "You ain't a lumberjack. You're just a freak." I don't recall, but I like to remember that the poet had a black turtleneck. And he's lined us up and he put us in a big circle. And he talked to us about imagery and metaphor, allegory, and I was just in heaven. And then he said, "All right, we're going to go around the circle, and I want each of you to describe the night." And I was ready. And I was to his right, so I was the last one. And as we traveled around the circle, I began to realize that my brain worked a little bit differently than my peers. It sort of went like this: black, super black, dark black, black, inky black. That one was pretty interesting. Bluish black, dark black, 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 really black, really, really black, cold black. And I thought, oh, how urbane. Here I am. And the tension is building. And it comes to me, and they turn and they wait. And I said, "A black bowl covers the earth, punched here and there with bursts of light." A freak. They called him a freak. And that was the day that Paul Bunyan decided to live small. He sort of slouched and crouched. He laughed more quietly. He only used one axe. He cut slower. Paul Bunyan shrunk. I waited for the applause that did not come. What came was laughter, but not that joyful laughter, that laughter that drives middle school girls to go cry alone in the bathroom. And that was the day I stopped writing poetry, and I began to live small. I had this loud barking laugh, and I decided to start laughing like the other girls. And I would toss my hair, ha 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 ha. And I just sort of shrunk. I slouched, and I crouched, and I lived small. Well, Paul Bunyan didn't know if he had friends, but he knew nobody was laughing at him anymore. And so he worked on the crew, and he cut, and he laughed at the right times, but not too loudly. Well, then came the blue winter, where the air was so cold the loggers and the lumberjacks' words froze in the air. And when the thaw came, it made for a very colorful spring. But Paul Bunyan, even the smaller version of Paul Bunyan, was still Paul Bunyan. And so he would take off his coat and he'd walk through that cold blue wind. And one day, as he was walking in the deep, deep snow, he heard a cry. And it wasn't a human cry, but he definitely knew it was a baby's cry. And he looked down and he saw 2 points coming out of the snow. And he moved the snow away, and there he looked into the big blue eyes of this baby ox. And he could tell it was a baby because of the shape of her face, but she was huge. And she was all alone, and she was frozen blue. And he moved the snow, and he tried to pull her out, but she was too big, and he was too small. And she was fading fast. And he knew that if he went back to camp and he got those fellas to come and help him, she'd be gone. And he pulled, but he was just too small. And suddenly the wind roared through the air, and in the wind was his mother's voice, singing out, "Paul, my boy, you were born to live big." And he cried at the wind, I can't be big. They'll laugh at me. I won't have any friends. I can't do this." And he started to walk away, but his mama's voice rang in the wind again, "Paul, my boy, you were born to live big." And Paul realized that small Paul couldn't save this little one's life, but big Paul could. And it was a very dramatic moment. He stood up and suddenly he just grew, and chest hair popped out the top of his shirt and buttons were flying and his flannel arms went wide and he bellowed into the wind, "I am Paul Bunyan and I was born to live big." It was very dramatic. And he swooped down and he pulled Babe the ox out of the snow and he hefted her over his shoulder, and they walked back to camp, both as big as they pleased. I didn't have a big Paul Bunyan moment. I had little tiny moments where I realized that the dainty small laugh wasn't nearly as fun. And it didn't feel like laughing to me. And so I went back to my laugh. And slowly over the years, I began to stand on stages and tell stories. And slowly over the years, perhaps it was my mother's voice in the wind, telling me one thing at a time, giving me permission to take up as much space as I wanted to take up. And I deserved to live big. We all know the stories of Paul Bunyan and Babe the ox. They carved out the Grand Canyon. They straightened the Mississippi River. They dug up the Great Lakes. But not one of those stories would have happened if Paul had lived small. A black bull covers the earth, punched here and there with bursts of light. But what is the light? Those brilliant balls of fiery gas designed to lead, inspire, and shine. But what if they inspire less, shine small, and merely flicker? Then the girl far below with the big green glasses looks up at the sky, sighing and crying for permission to shine. But the stars blink her away. And so she sighs, shrugs, and lives small. If those stars should open wide and release the light they hold inside, then the girl stands tall, stands proud. Then the man laughs loud. These brilliant stars, they take up space and grant to us the very grace to do the same, to live, to love, to laugh, to shine, to punch through whatever bowl we hide behind and seize the life, the big, bright life we deserve to find. Thank you.